Not a sucker for the urban legends. I live in a big city, far from the superstitions and rumors that circle small towns. Now you know how that goes. Everything changes the night I agreed to spend one night in the old textile factory, abandoned and considered cursed by the locals. It was set on the outskirts, and with every passing year, the overgrown weeds and dense vegetation completely overwhelmed the factory. The humongous structure was broken with windows and doors that used to creak at the slightest touch of the wind. They said decades ago, there had been a horrible fire while they were inside, and dozens of workers got killed in it. Ever since then, no one has had the courage to go near it. The bet was simple. Spend the night in the factory and film anything as proof. It wasn't the money, but rather the rush, or maybe even a desire to prove myself right, considering that these were just made-up stories to scare the kids. I entered the factory as dusk approached. The air was heavy with fetidity, and it smelled of mold and rust. My flashlight quivered in a palm wet with sweat as I made my way down dark halls into rooms of head-high machines, all covered with rust and dust. Only the occasional drip of water or some small animal hiding in the refuse, making now and then a scurrying noise, broke that complete silence. I started pacing around, trying to relieve the tension from the heat. With each step, it escalated. The shadows seemed to hide something, and every sound felt like an announcement of some most probably unpleasant notice. In one of the rooms, I found an old wooden chair in the middle of a circle delineated with charcoal on the floor. I remained there for a short time, trying to figure out what that symbol meant. I heard a sound behind me, but I reacted faster than seeing anything. I jerked back, but there was nothing, just space. Empty darkness illuminated by the flashlight. A chill went down my spine. I kept walking attentively now. Every sound, every movement around me. I crossed the line of the corridors, finally entering a staircase leading to the basement. The darkness below was almost tangible. I descended slowly. Each step creaked under my weight. It felt colder and heavier in the air. At the bottom of the stairs, an enormous underground hall was visible through a part-open metal door. As I entered through the lobby, the flashlight illuminated the walls smeared with dark pigments. In the center, a vast boiler turned off for years loomed over everything. The silence was suffocating. Suddenly, an icy wind swallowed me, and abruptly the metal door shut with a loud bang. I dashed towards the door and began pulling the handle with all my force. The act was, however, fruitless as the door was locked. Panic began creeping in. That is when I saw someone moving in the corner of the hall, a tall, slender shadow, almost as bright as not to be noticed. The flashlight flickered and went off briefly, leaving me in complete darkness. When it came back on, the shadow was closer. I felt its presence, though it couldn't be seen distinctly. A claw of terror grabbed my chest. I tried to say something. No sound came out of my mouth. The shadow kept coming closer, with each step slowly echoing through that hollow hall. Suddenly it stopped. The flashlight flickered again, and this time stayed off longer. I could feel something on my shoulder in the blackness, cold, penetrating my clothes with a particular awful touch. Frantic, I shook the flashlight, trying to make it work. When I finally got it to work, the shadow was gone. But the feeling of being watched remained. My heart still hammered. I searched for another exit. I found one small gap in the wall, more of a vent. I pushed through, tearing my clothes and skin in the process. I found a narrow corridor on the other side leading me back upstairs. I found myself in a room I didn't recognize, with walls covered by strange drawings and symbols that looked precisely like they had been drawn in blood. Panic overtook me, and I started running, without looking back, through the corridors and rooms until I finally found the exit. I started feeling alive again once I was outside the factory, in the fresh night air. I ran to my car, and without a last look back, I drove off. On the way back, the memories of that night played like a movie in my mind. I do not describe to anyone what happened in that room. I simply mention that I did not find anything interesting there, so as not to lead them to panic and not to be termed a coward or a liar. It is up to this very day that it feels as though something had followed me out of that room. Sometimes, during the silence of the night, I still feel that cold touch on my shoulder, reminding me that some doors should never be opened. Please like and subscribe if you are enjoying. My name is Daniel, and I have been an urban explorer for almost 10 years. I have seen places that could keep an average person up at night, but one experience in particular has laid a waste to my nerves. Any doubt that I could not share the terror of that day, I will try as much as I can. As a matter of fact, it was on a Friday night when I found myself with my buddy Michael, who are in São Paulo, Brazil, and decided to undertake an adventure which involved visiting an empty sanatorium. Many spooky stories were told about patients who never left that place alive. The building was all but in ruins. Nature slowly started taking over again. As we approached the ruins, I could feel that it became the perfect scenario to see terrifying things. We reached the sanatorium at about 11 p.m. Equipped with flashlights and cameras, our courage seemed to be enough for all of the things we had seen in life. As usual, we also had police sticks, tasers, and knives on us, just in case something needed to be cut or some other danger occurred to us. The front door was locked, but we found a broken window where we could enter. The smell of carrion said hello to us. "What a wretched smell," Michael said under his breath, pinching his nose. We then proceeded to walk through the entrance hall, in which every step lit up the path ahead of us. The walls were full of graffiti, and here and there, some tatters from mental health campaign posters remained. We delved deeper into each corridor, and the tension was rising. The atmosphere seemed saturated with suffering, every step echoing in a disturbing silence. We felt that we were not alone, but it was hard to distinguish what was real and what our minds were creating. We reached a half-closed door. When we got inside, the room was empty, with nothing except for an old wheelchair in the corner. On entering, the chair started moving slowly. I became paralyzed with fear and could not react as Michael pointed his flashlight. "Daniel, look at this," he said, voice quivering. The movement stopped short, and the silence that followed was terrible. "Should we go on?" I asked, trying to control the panic. "I am not sure, but we are already here, aren't we?" Michael replied hesitantly. We continued our exploration of the sanatorium, never without the feeling that someone was watching us. We heard footsteps approaching us in one of the corridors, for which Michael shone his flashlight, but there was nothing. "Maybe it's an animal," I whispered, trying to convince ourselves. But we knew in our bones that something was very wrong. We discovered a staircase to the basement. The atmosphere downstairs was even more oppressive. I proceeded down first, and Michael's immediately followed. On the last step, we looked down a narrow corridor next to several doors. We decided to venture into the basement before we climbed back upstairs. After each door opened, we were welcomed by images of disuse. Beds were rusted over, and old medical equipment, and patient files were scattered on the floor. "This is worse than what I thought," Michael said, glancing through the records. At the end of this corridor, there was an iron door. It seemed to have been forced not long before, because it was locked. We opened the thing with some effort and found a circular room with a chair in the center. Chains hung from the walls, scratch marks on the floor. It was a place of torture. Suddenly, we heard a low, cold laugh. Michael and I looked at each other, terror on our faces. The laugh turned into an agonizing scream that echoed through the room. "We have to get out of here now!" Michael screamed. There was a creepy feeling around us, something we couldn't see but knew was there. We ran back through the corridor up the stairs as fast as possible. Upon arriving at the upper floor, the door through which we had entered was closed. We tried to open it, There seemed to be something or someone holding the door from the other side. "Come on, open it," Michael cried, desperate. We started hearing voices around us, voices we didn't understand. As the flashlight beam reached the end of the corridor, Michael noticed that there was a dark figure standing there. I am sure that it was not a human being. The figure moved towards us, slowly, with a terrifying, unsteady gait. "Daniel, this isn't normal," Michael cried, unsheathing his baton from its scabbard. As a last-ditch attempt, I activated my taser to be ready for the defense against any physical threat that might come upon us. Still, the figure didn't stop and came at us. We got to open the door and ran out of the building. We didn't stop until we reached the car, more frightened than before. It was only after we sat down scared and breathless that we noticed we all had unexplained scratches and bumps on us. The dashboard clock showed it was already 3 in the morning. There were no explanations for how 4 hours could pass by this quickly. After that night, Michael and I never went back to the sanatorium. Both of us were having nightmares, like, all the time, about the place and that thing that was chasing us. I don't know what we found there, but I know that something didn't want us to leave alive. The experience marked us deeply, and even today, when talking about it, chills make me ask if it's worth it to keep doing these reviews on abandoned places. "Never again," Michael said, staring into the horizon. "We're never going back to a place like that." And I said yes, shivering. That sanatorium had become our permanent nightmare. I'm Jack Harrington. I am 34 years old, a writer. In 2015, my friends Mike, Sarah, and I had planned to take a tour of an abandoned hospital in Rochester, New York City. It had been closed from use since many years ago. We were all enthusiastic about urban exploration and knew a lot about the many horror stories surrounding such adventures. We arrived that night, a night I will never forget. We brought flashlights, handheld cameras, and hunting knives, just in case we encountered any wild animals. The entrance to the hospital was overgrown with vegetation, and the once majestic doors were now broken and rusty. The air inside was thick, and the smell of mold mixed with something I couldn't identify made us hesitate. But we continued, our flashlights illuminating the path. The corridor was filled with debris, and the graffiti and black stains on the walls only added to the incredibly intimidating feeling. "What if we go to the basement first?" Mike suggested, trying to sound brave. "Sure we can," Sarah agreed, adjusting the strap of her backpack. I nodded, and a sense of fear and trembling went through me. We descended the creaky staircase, the sounds echoing through the empty bowels of the building. Downstairs, it was colder and smellier. We entered a sizable room that was likely a storage area of some kind. As we illuminated the space, our eyes were instantly drawn to a corner. There was something there that made my stomach turn. On the floor were pieces that looked like a human body, bones, flesh, and a pool of coagulated blood. Sarah screamed, and Mike started to calm her down immediately, but panic began to set in among us. "Let's leave this place," I mumbled, scared in my voice. "There is something wrong here." As we moved away, we heard a sound behind us, a sound that was a moan. I pointed my flashlight toward the sound and found a woman. She was completely bloodied. Her clothes were torn, and her eyes were wide with fear. She came toward us, step by dragging step, and her gaze was fixed on us. Fear paralyzed me for a moment. "Who's there?" I shouted, sounding stronger than I intended. The figure materialized from the darkness, a man, also covered in blood, this time holding a knife. "You are not indigenous," he growled and pounced towards us. Rushing through the corridor, we attempted to look for a way of escaping. Each and everything was barred, the windows and doors. Some of them were even barricades. Fear and terror could be felt in the air, and the smell thereof. We managed to get into ground through a broken window on time, before falling due to injuries that resulted from scratches. Just as we were going away from the hospital, we glanced behind us for the last time. Only this time around, she stood at us with her bloody face. We never returned to St. Mary's Hospital, and everything changed in our lives from that point on. Every experience, every sound we heard in that building haunts us to this day. Mike and Sarah tried to block it from their minds, but I couldn't. It feels like there's something we know that doesn't make sense, something that still watches us from the other side. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still hear that moan, that sound that froze us with fear. And I know that somehow, that night in the hospital marked us for life. The people in that room haven't left us completely. They're there, waiting, watching, from the other side of the veil. My name is David Thompson. I am 27 years old, and what I am about to tell you happened in 2019 in Flint, Michigan. My whole life long, I never used to believe in things that are not easily explained scientifically. I always felt there was a reason for what happened around us until then. I was with my longtime friends, Mike Johnson, 28, Sarah Miller, 25, Tom Harris, 26. The abandoned places, which we always loved to explore, created adrenaline in us and the desire to know what was left there. We entered through the back door, a passage partly clogged with pieces of wood and rusty metal. The first thing we noticed was the smell, a rotting odor that made us all cover our noses. Mike, always the bravest, joked that it must be dead rats. We walked through the corridors, our phone flashlights trembling in our hands. The beams of light revealed peeling walls, old machines covered in dust, and an alarming amount of cobwebs. Sarah whispered that it seemed like time had stopped there. Suddenly we heard a grunt. We froze. I looked at my friends, trying to see if they had heard it too. Tom tried to reassure us, saying it must be just the wind passing through some crack. We continued, but now each step was taken with more caution. The grunts continued, getting louder each time. They came from a corridor to our left. Mike suggested we investigate, and against our better judgment, we agreed. We walked toward the sound, and the smell became unbearable. It was a mix of carrion and something even worse, something I couldn't identify. When we turned the corner, we saw it. A pig, but not an ordinary pig. It was huge, the size of a human, and it stood on two legs. Its features were human. Sunken dark eyes, pinkish skin, but with a texture that resembled raw meat. It looked at us, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Sarah screamed, and that broke the trance. The pigman emitted a terrible grunt and started moving toward us. We ran, adrenaline taking over. We heard the grunts and heavy footsteps behind us. We entered a room and locked the door, our breaths quick and heavy. Inside, we called the police. We told them about the pigman, but they thought it was a prank. Outside, we heard the pig grunt, his steps getting closer. The smell was there again, so strong it made our eyes water. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, we heard the police sirens. When they arrived, the pigman was no longer there. They searched the building, found signs of our presence, but nothing of the creature. They treated us like a bunch of lunatics, but I know what we saw. We never again went to investigate deserted places after that night. Sometimes, still to this day, I wake up sweating with the sound of that pig's grunt in my mind. I try telling myself that we were just experiencing a form of shared madness. Nonetheless, it's hard sticking to this belief because a part of me knows that it was real. This thing still remains there, and it waits for us in the darkness. But that wasn't the end. We went home that night, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Mike tried to keep the humor, but we all noticed he was disturbed. Sarah, usually the happiest in the group, was pale and silent. Tom was constantly looking over his shoulder. There were a couple of odd events that occurred over time after that day. Sometimes at midnight, I would hear sounds like grunts made by pigs right by my bedroom window while asleep, though I'm not sure if they were dreams or realities. Literally, I could smell decay everywhere, even when lying down within my apartment's four walls. Where else would that come from? I impersonated a mad person. A week later, Mike called me in a panic. He swore he saw the pigman outside his house, standing on the corner, just staring. I went there, but there was no sign of anything. The police once again didn't take us seriously. Sarah also started reporting disturbing dreams where the pigman followed her through endless corridors, and she always woke up with the nauseating smell lingering in her room. We decided to meet again to discuss what was happening. We met at Tom's house. We were nervous, but there was a feeling of safety in being together. We talked late into the night, trying to find some logic to the events. That's when we heard it. The grunts. They came from outside. We ran to the windows, but the darkness outside was impenetrable. The horrible smell returned, filling the room. Sarah started crying, and Mike, for the first time, seemed genuinely scared. We locked all the doors and windows, armed ourselves with whatever we could find. The grunts grew louder, and now we could hear heavy footsteps outside the house. The flashlight beams trembled in our hands. We stayed absolutely silent, each of us listening to our own heartbeats, while the sounds outside grew louder. All of a sudden, a crashingly loud sound was heard, as if someone was attempting break through the front door. We cowered together in the living room to consider what course of action we should take. The thumping grew louder with desperation. There was quiet after that, just silence. No one moved. We tried to call the police again, but the line was dead. It wasn't clear what it was, but it appeared to be gone. One after another, we emerged from our hiding spots. The door was ruined, even though the thing that had broken it had disappeared. The smell, however, was still there, permeating the air. After that night, unfortunately due to the events and individual personal issues, each of us went our separate ways, never fully recovering. Mike moved to the other side of the country. Sarah started intensive therapy. And Tom simply disappeared. One day he was there, the next he wasn't answering calls, and his house was empty. I still live in Flint, constantly afraid of that cursed creature. The smell of rot seems to never completely leave me. I try to live a normal life, but I know that something dark and inexplicable found us that night, never left us, and is still out there. As I write this account, I can feel the smell again. Please like and subscribe if you are enjoying.